The Whipping Boy, Chapter 15. Of the Hot Potato Man and the Other Matters. The soldiers had passed by. Following the river, Jemmy ventured towards the city. Prince Brat strode along beside him. "Soon as I can, I aim to give you the slip," Jemmy warned. "You'll be on your way." The prince said nothing. The tide was low, and they traveled out of sight of the road, below a grassy embankment. In the distance, against billowing white clouds, stood a jack-straw jumble of ships' masts. "You can fend for your own self, can't you?" Jemmy asked suddenly. "Of course I can," answered the prince in a stinging voice. "I don't need folks of servants to fetch and carry for me." "It's settled then." "Settled? Skip off any time you like." With the tide out, a wide mud flat lay exposed. From long habit, Jemmy kept his eyes peeled for treasures, sandpipers scattered like mice before him. He spotted a barrel stave and pounced on it. "Trash!" remarked the prince. "What are you doing?" "Mudlarking." "What?" "I've got to eat, don't I? If I can collect enough driftwood, I can sell it as firewood." The prince shrugged and walked on ahead. Jemmy gazed after him for a moment. What did a prince know about living off the streets? His meals had always appeared on china plates and silver trays as if by magic. Left to himself, he'd starve. "It's not my worry," Jemmy muttered. "What?" "You, that's what. If you get hungry enough, you'll scramble back to the castle." The prince glared back at Jemmy, and then stooped down to retrieve the broken leg of a chair from the mud. "Is this worth something?" "Anything?" Jemmy nodded. Before long, the two of them had collected 3 more barrel staves and the back of the chair. Then Jemmy found something even more valuable to him, a bent and battered bird cage. He could go into business with that. Straightened out, it would hold rats. They rounded a bend, and the crack of a whip sounded in the air like a firecracker. Jemmy crawled up the embankment for a look. A weary old coach was mired in the mud hole on the road. The coachman, looking just as old and rickety, held the reins of the 2-horse team and cracked his whip in the air again. "Pull, gents! Be good lads! It's me own fault not leading you around this bog. Me eyesight ain't what it was, is it, old Tawes?" Jemmy watched for another moment as the horses tried to pull the coach free. The coach was enameled blue with yellow letters painted on the door panel. "Captain Harry Nips, Hot Potato Man." Jemmy crawled over the embankment. A ride to the city would suit him fine. "Sir, would you take on passengers? Here, let me set these barrel staves under the wheels." "Don't mind if you do," said Captain Nip. "I'm late for the fair as it is." Jemmy busied himself laying a firm track for the wheels. Prince Brat watched from the edge of the embankment. "You must be carrying a heavy load," Jemmy cried out. "Try again, Cap'n." The old man cracked his whip, the horses strained, and the coach rolled up out of the bog. "Hop in, lad." Jemmy opened the door and saw that the coach was heavily loaded with raw potatoes and a huge iron kettle. Jemmy settled himself as best he could, and the coach lurched forward. "At last," Jemmy thought, "you're free of the prince." But he couldn't resist a backward glance. Prince Brat was standing in the center of the road. He dropped his load of driftwood and merely gazed at the receding coach. Jemmy straightened and folded his arms. The prince wasn't his lookout any longer, but he'd stood there like a wounded bird. "Blast him! A prince hadn't a cockeyed notion how to fend for himself. "Stop, Captain!" Jemmy shouted. "We left me friend behind." The hot potato man pulled up on the reins. Jemmy leaned out a window. With an arm he motioned Prince Brat to come along. For an instant Jemmy thought he saw a smile flash across the prince's face, but it had vanished by the time the heir to the throne joined him inside the coach. They rode in silence. Jemmy wondered what had possessed him to refer to Prince Brat as his friend. Friend? Cows would give beer first. Then minutes later, the coach rocked to a sudden halt. "Stand and deliver!" came a shout. A pair of highwaymen were training pistols on Captain Nips. Jemmy hardly had to peer out. The voice was familiar. It was Hold Your Nose Billy and Cutwater.
Chapter 16, wherein the prince neither bawls nor bellows. Jemmy felt a surge of the creeps. Run for it, he wondered. Instead, he began to burrow out of sight under the loose heap of potatoes. Remember, he whispered to the prince, it's me they're after, not you. Tell him we split up. Tell him I swam the river. Prince Brat merely looked at him. The voices outside boomed. Stand and deliver, I said. And I heard you, said Captain Nips. Deliver what, potatoes? Scurvy rascals, help yourself. Hang your potatoes, roared Hold Your Nose Billy. Deliver us some information and you can be off. We're after two runaway apprentices. Apprentice highwaymen? Captain Nips scoffed. Our affair. Girl with a bear said she saw 'em streaking for the river. You carrying passengers? Jemmy pulled the iron kettle over his head. A coach door was yanked open, and Jemmy could hear Cutwater muffled cackle. Got one! The whipping boy, it is! Where's your master, eh? Jemmy held his breath. He had no reason to believe that the prince wouldn't betray him again. There came a stiff pause. And then the Prince Brat said, Swam the river. By then, Hold Your Nose Billy had ripped open the opposite coach door. Even through the kettle, Jemmy imagined he could smell garlic. Swim the river? Faugh! He'd need scales and fins. Hardly a moment later, the kettle was grabbed off and Jemmy's head stood exposed. Here's the potato we're after, Hold Your Nose Billy roared gleefully. Jemmy and the prince were yanked out of the coach, and the big outlaw shouted to Captain Nips, Throw me down your horsewhip and drive on. Hanging on to each boy by the scruff of the neck, the highwaymen scrambled out of sight below the embankment. Hold Your Nose Billy looked angry enough to throttle Jemmy on the spot. Tricked me, did you? He bellowed. Flummoxed me with your fancy quill scratching. The game's up, Jemmy thought. He tumbled that the ransom note ain't worth scat. But trying to look as innocent as possible, he replied, Sir? A gold sack or two would have satisfied me. And Cutwater, snarled the hairy outlaw. Greedy ain't our middle name, but you, raising the ante to a great cartload, reckoned to slow us down, didn't you? It would be easier to drag around a dead horse. If we ain't light-footed, we're caught. That was your scheme. What a pair of fools, Jimmy thought. That hadn't been his scheme at all. You've got it all wrong, he declared. I swear it. Hey, enough plunder to burden us directly to the gallows, eh? Hold Your Nose Billy continued. Well, here's a whipping you won't never forget. He snapped Captain Nips' whip in the air to get the feel of it. Here's a whipping boy, Cutwater put in. You said it'll go powerful worse for us if we thrash the prince himself. Hold Your Nose Billy nodded sharply. Cutwater upturned the prince, holding him by the ankles in the air. Go to it, Billy! Jemmy finally found his voice. Lay down the whip, he commanded with a princely air. Don't you have an ounce of sense between you? Hold your gab, simpletons. You can just fill your pockets with plunder and be light-footed as ever, Jemmy declared. Nobody flummoxes Hold Your Nose Billy and gets away with it. The whip snapped across the prince's back. Jemmy held his breath. He knew what it felt like. He saw that Prince Brad had set his jaw, just as Jemmy had always done, and not a sound escaped his lips. Harder, Cutwater advised. You didn't raise it and peep out of him. The big man let fly again. He must have a hide like an elephant, said Cutwater. He don't feel a thing. He'll feel this, Hold Your Nose Billy thundered, and the leather whisked through the air. The prince's jacket was being shredded. Ball out, Jemmy shouted. He dreamed of seeing the prince whipped, but now that it was happening, he found no satisfaction in it. Holler and cry out, cry out. I won't tell anyone. But Prince Brad only girded himself for the next blow. From the top of the embankment came an outraged voice. Betsy and her dancing bear stood there. Ruffians, she cried out, what are you doing to that poor boy? No business of yours, snarled Cutwater. Stop it! But Hold Your Nose Billy raised the whip again. The next thing Jemmy knew, the girl had slipped the rope from around the bear's neck. Sic 'em, Petunia! Get them!